Welcome back to Monitors Unboxed. Today I'm looking at the first 6K gaming monitor, the Samsung Odyssey G80HS. Now you might be wondering, why on earth would someone need a 6K gaming monitor? That's a crazy resolution. It's obviously going to be too taxing for modern games. Well, this display has some interesting features that are specifically designed to make it compelling for multiple use cases. The 6K mode is designed for high DPI productivity tasks. You get a large 32-inch panel size, IPS LCD so no risk of burn-in, and a decent 165Hz refresh rate so productivity apps feel smooth and responsive. None of this sluggish 60Hz crap that has plagued high DPI monitors for far too long. And then this monitor offers some gaming chops through its 3K dual mode, a lower resolution that is more compatible with today's GPU hardware, but you get a bump up to a 330Hz refresh rate. Variable refresh rates are of course supported. Samsung claim fast response times. This is supposed to be a genuine gaming monitor. Today's video is brought to you by Ugreen and their new Nexode Pro 160-watt charger with a built-in retractable USB-C cable. It delivers up to 140 watts through the USB-C 1 port or the 70cm retractable cable, which can be extended to 8 different lengths, keeping your desk tidy with the cable hidden when not in use. There's 4 charging ports in total with up to 160 watts of simultaneous power output, making it easy to charge 2 laptops simultaneously. There's even a built-in smart display showing real-time stats for every port, plus there's a Bluetooth/Wi-Fi app that lets you remotely adjust charging modes, power settings, and the smart display itself. If you need even more power, Ugreen also offer the Nexode Pro 300-watt desktop charger with 8 ports and the same smart display, making it the ultimate charging hub for your entire setup. Check out the links in the description to learn more. So what's the catch? The Odyssey G80HS costs $1,600 US, which is very expensive. It's about double the price of a 32-inch 4K 240Hz OLED monitor. It also has questionable HDR performance, which I'll get into later, no spoilers just yet. But while it is expensive for a gaming monitor, it's not crazy for a high DPI productivity display. Asus have a 32-inch 6K ProArt monitor called the PA32QCV that's $1,300, but it's just 60Hz, so it's a no-go for me, and I'm sure some others as well. Anyway, let's get into things, and I want to first discuss this monitor's biggest selling point, the 6144 by 3456 resolution. This is a very sharp monitor capable of producing excellent levels of detail. At a 32-inch panel size, this resolution leads to a pixel density of 220 ppi, nearly 60% higher than a standard 4K screen. Up against the 32-inch 4K LCDs and OLEDs that I use daily, I felt the 6K resolution was an immediately noticeable improvement. This 32-inch 6K panel has a similar pixel density to 27-inch 5K, with both panels forming a new wave of high DPI gaming class options. These screens are designed more around a pixel density target than a specific resolution, so when you look at them in that context, the high 6144 by 3456 resolution on the 32-inch model makes sense. It's bigger than the 27-inch panel with more screen real estate, so the resolution should increase as a result, giving buyers more pixels to work with. The 6K resolution provides the biggest benefit to desktop productivity apps. Text quality is outstanding with even sharper edges than 4K screens, and high-resolution photos are displayed with increased detail. While the end product looks similar to 27-inch 5K as the pixel density is roughly the same, 6K versus 4K on a 32-inch screen is a more substantial improvement than 5K versus 4K on a 27-inch screen, which makes sense as the jump in density is larger. It's a big win for people that love a large panel but also love a high DPI experience. The other benefit you get for productivity is the increased pixel real estate, especially when you need to work with higher resolution assets. For example, if you need to edit a 4K image in Photoshop on a 4K screen, you can't do this at a 100% scale while displaying the interface. You typically need to use a 66% scale to fit the entire image on screen. On a 6K screen, you can view the 4K image at full resolution, 100% scale, while still having 60% of the display available for the interface and tools. Viewing the image at a 100% scale is better because it means you won't see any scaling artifacts. For these types of use cases, 6K is genuinely a much better experience. For gaming, the benefits of a 6K resolution are less significant. I tried a range of games at the full 6K resolution, and don't get me wrong, they looked absolutely brilliant in terms of the level of detail and sharpness. It is an improvement on 4K, but it's not a transformative difference. 32-inch 4K still looks really good for gaming. The issue with gaming at 6K is the extreme performance cost. The number of pixels your GPU has to render is 2.5 times higher than 4K, which drastically cuts the frame rate for what is ultimately not a 2.5 times better experience visually. Getting much above 60 FPS at 6K is a struggle even on high-end GPUs. For example, I hooked this monitor up to a GeForce RTX 5080, and to consistently achieve over 60 FPS in Cyberpunk 2077, I had to drop the game to the high preset with no ray tracing and use DLSS upscaling in the performance mode. The same configuration at 4K delivered over 110 FPS, providing all the benefits of a high refresh rate experience. In another example, I was playing the new LEGO Batman game at 6K, which looks gorgeous as that game has great texture quality, but I had to drop the preset to medium and use DLSS performance upscaling to achieve 60 FPS. This is not the sort of monitor where, with current GPU hardware, you can use the highest resolution and highest graphics settings at the same time. With that said, I'm talking about a AAA gaming experience here. There are types of games where a higher resolution is beneficial and the performance cost is not a significant factor. Anything heavy on interfaces and menus, so strategy games, city builders, that sort of thing, those look great at 6K. If you mostly enjoy lightweight 2D games and indie titles, this is also a great use case for 6K. Now, while the 6K resolution may not be optimal for gaming on the whole, this monitor does have a neat trick up its sleeve: dual mode functionality. Dual mode is a feature where the monitor runs at a lower resolution, typically 1/4 native, but at an increased refresh rate, typically double native. As the panel is native 6K, this actually leads to huge benefits to the dual mode. On 4K dual mode displays, the dual mode configuration is 1080p, which is a pretty sizable downgrade in resolution and sharpness, especially on a 32-inch panel. I certainly don't want to play most games at 1080p. But on a 6K dual mode display like the G80HS, the dual mode configuration is 3K, a resolution of 3072 by 1728. The refresh rate also increases from 165 to 330 Hz. A 3K resolution on a 32-inch panel is much more usable, and it's suitable for playing a wide range of games without such a significant loss to visuals as we saw from 1080p dual modes previously. Like on other monitors, dual mode works seamlessly here. You enable the option in the OSD, the resolution drops, and the refresh rate increases. There are no other limitations. Color performance, contrast, input lag, those sorts of things are all preserved in exactly the same way as the 6K mode. Samsung have mapped dual mode to a press of the OSD toggle to the right for quick access, though strangely it isn't just an on-off toggle, it will also cycle you to the 24-inch emulation mode, which is a bit annoying when you want to quickly turn dual mode off. The G80HS does not use integer scaling in its 3K dual mode. One 3K pixel is typically made up of 4 primary native pixels with up to 4 additional pixels dimly activated. This gets closer to a native-like presentation than most other dual mode monitors, so I think it looks decent, and I should remind you that a native 6K panel can never look like a native 3K panel due to an inherent subpixel layout difference at the hardware level. The 3K mode is obviously not as sharp or detailed as the 6K mode, and this can feel like a substantial downgrade if you've been using the 6K mode for a while. Text and desktop apps are blurrier, you're losing out on that crystal clear sharpness of the native 6K mode. But broadly speaking, it looks similar to the sharpness of a 27-inch 1440p panel, maybe slightly softer, and that type of panel has a very usable resolution. It's nowhere near the downgrade in clarity I saw on 4K dual mode monitors running in the 1080p configuration. Those modes are very blurry on a 32-inch screen, whereas 3K dual mode looks reasonable. You wouldn't use the 3K mode in situations where the loss in resolution is very noticeable though. Text-heavy desktop apps, you just keep it in the 6K configuration. The major benefit to the 3K mode is its usability for gaming. This is a great resolution for games, giving you at worst a 1440p-like experience. I was really satisfied with the level of detail and clarity in the 3K mode. The in-game UI still looks good in most cases, it's not blurry, and ultimately, it's just a great mode for gaming. After about 10 minutes of gameplay, you quickly forget you're not getting the full resolution, full sharpness experience. And 3K gaming is much less taxing than 6K gaming, so you end up sacrificing a bit in top-end clarity and sharpness to gain more than double the frame rate at the same settings, which overall is a better experience in my opinion. The 3K dual mode is usable for all types of games and is my preferred way to play most titles. This makes the G80HS a fantastic versatile monitor for multiple use cases. There's the native 6K mode, providing excellent text clarity and elite sharpness for desktop apps and productivity use, and then there's the 3K 330Hz mode for high-performance gaming, which avoids the large hit associated with running games at 6K and offers a higher refresh rate. Neither mode feels overly compromised, you're getting the best of both worlds, and this allows dual mode to finally live up to its promise. Moving now into response time performance, and while the Odyssey G80HS does come with adjustable overdrive settings, you can only do so while adaptive sync is disabled. Most people are going to use this display with G-Sync, FreeSync, or some form of VRR enabled, in which case the overdrive settings are grayed out, and you have to use Samsung's default tuning. So that's exactly what we're going to look at, performance in the VRR mode. I'll start with the 6K configuration at the maximum 165Hz. This mode performs fine with an average response time of 7.4 milliseconds and no noticeable overshoot artifacts. This isn't quite the speed I'd like to see at 165Hz, but it gets relatively close and cumulative deviation is good. Essentially, the gaming experience at 6K 165Hz is decent enough if you can manage to run games at that level. As the refresh rate decreases in the 6K mode, performance hovers around an 8 millisecond response time average, and there's no overshoot all the way down to 60Hz. Cumulative deviation is good, and refresh compliance indicates reasonable support for at least 120Hz, if not a little higher. Again, ideally performance would be a little faster, but given in games at 6K you're probably going to be sitting in the lower part of the range, it's good to see response times hold up there and ultimately offer a single overdrive mode experience. Compared to other displays at their maximum refresh rate, the G80HS isn't especially fast, but it's not drastically out of the range we normally see from IPS LCDs. The 5K LG 27GM950B is slightly faster in overall response times, but when we flick over to cumulative deviation, the 5K and 6K options are essentially neck and neck. It's good to confirm this monitor does not suffer from any speed issues, and ultimately a result of 500 here is only 20% or so behind the Gigabyte M32 UP, which is close to the top of the chart. What this means is we're seeing a normal result from a fast IPS panel. Across the refresh rate range, Samsung have optimized this panel to not show overshoot artifacts, so again the average results are towards the bottom of the chart. But in cumulative deviation, which measures the balance between response time speed and overshoot artifacts, the G80HS is very much a standard IPS LCD with a mid-table result. It's offering an almost identical experience to the 27GM950B and most other high-resolution LCDs. The only major difference is to an OLED panel, which are an order of magnitude faster and so offer better motion clarity at the same refresh rate as an LCD. The 240Hz PG32 UCDM3 at the top of the chart is roughly twice as clear in fast motion as the G80HS at 165Hz. Now this Samsung monitor isn't overly speedy at 120 or 60Hz, but I'm not seeing problematic results here either, like for example crazy amounts of overshoot. The 3K dual mode configuration has different response time tuning than the 6K mode, so the monitor gets a bit faster at the same refresh rate when switched over to the 3K mode. For example, at 165Hz, we go from a 7.4 millisecond average at 6K to a 5.7 millisecond average at 3K. This is largely to push the display to the max at 330Hz. A response time of 7.8 milliseconds is well short of what is required for proper 330Hz gaming, so we're running into compliance issues here where it takes longer for the display to finish transitioning between colors than it does to refresh. This only resolves itself at around the 200Hz mark, so anything above that is getting bottlenecked to some degree, though there's not much overshoot at those high refresh rates, which is good to see. In the middle and lower parts of the refresh range, the 3K mode runs at about a 6 millisecond response time average, though overshoot gets increasingly more noticeable as we move down the refresh rates. At 60Hz, performance improves, but this doesn't appear to be due to variable overdrive. Instead, at around 62Hz, the monitor usually flicks over to running at double rate instead. This means a 60Hz input in the VRR mode runs the screen at 120Hz, even though the minimum refresh rate as reported in the VRR mode is 48Hz. Between 120 and just above 60Hz, there's an inverse ghosting rate of 30 to 40%, which means there are noticeable artifact trails behind objects in motion. It isn't a complete deal breaker, but this mode could have been better optimized for these refresh rates. Instead, what we get is a mode that is best used between about 220 and 140Hz. This is where the screen is fast enough while displaying minimal artifacts. In the dual mode, the G80HS is unimpressive at its maximum 330Hz refresh rate compared to other monitors. Performance is a bit better on average, and it's certainly in a usable position, but it's not quite as good as you'd get from a dedicated, say, 1440p 330Hz monitor using IPS LCD technology. Input lag is low in both the 6K and 3K modes with a processing delay below 1 millisecond. This is standard for a modern gaming monitor and allows for a fast experience. For the best responsiveness and overall latency, you'll want to use the display in the 330Hz mode, though the 6K mode is still smooth and far better than any 60Hz display in terms of lag. The Odyssey G80HS is a wide gamut monitor, though it's not especially wide gamut by modern standards. We're looking at 94% coverage of DCI-P3, which is a little short of the full coverage we'd like to see in 2026, and Rec 2020 coverage is 74%. As you can see from the chart, this puts the G80HS in the normal range for IPS LCDs, but not quite as good as the latest QD-OLED screens or the LG 5K monitor, which has an exceptionally wide gamut. Factory calibration on this monitor is okay, gamma performance is good, especially if you're after a flat 2.2, though my unit was slightly tinted blue out of the box, leading to a color temperature of 7000K. There's also some oversaturation by default due to the wide gamut nature of this display, which expands SDR Rec 709 colors up to fill the entire gamut. There's a couple of ways to get a better SDR experience. One is to use Windows 11's auto color management. This configuration doesn't change grayscale performance, but does reduce oversaturation, and it properly emulates sRGB colors, leading to a Delta E average in color checker of 6.8, which is average, but superior to the default mode. You can also flick the G80HS over into an sRGB mode through changing the color space setting, which still allows you to adjust all other settings, including white balance. Again, this mode doesn't change much in terms of grayscale performance, and color performance is slightly worse than using ACM, but it's a good option if you'd like this sort of configuration with a device that doesn't support color management. sRGB mode grayscale performance is not that great, especially compared to other monitors. I'm normally looking for a Delta E average below 5.0, and the G80HS falls short of that. This puts it towards the bottom of the chart. Color checker performance is not great either, though I wouldn't describe it as terrible, it's just comparatively not at the level of other 32-inch options. The one saving grace here is that Samsung offer a lot of color settings, so you can make changes in the monitor hardware to improve performance. I was able to reduce the grayscale Delta E to 3.0, fix up the white balance, and improve the color checker Delta E to 4.2, all of which are great numbers that I'd call well calibrated. Our optimal settings are available to Patreon members. Further calibration can really tidy up any remaining loose ends. You're seeing the results here of a pass-through CalMan. So while the G80HS doesn't have the best calibration out of the box, certainly not at the level you'd be happy with from a professional grade monitor, which makes a bit of sense as this is a gaming monitor, you can get this running nicely for SDR work and a bit of working in, say, DCI-P3, provided you're comfortable with a monitor not covering the entire P3 gamut. Maximum brightness is sufficient at 445 nits, that's right within the normal range we see from modern IPS LCDs. It doesn't do anything particularly special here. Monitors with proper mini LED backlights will typically get much brighter. You can see the LG 5K model getting up to 800 nits, but for standard indoor usage, around 450 nits is more than enough in my opinion. Minimum brightness of 63 nits is below average, but isn't anything crazy bad. The native contrast ratio of this display is pretty good for an IPS LCD. I recorded a result of 1940:1 after calibration, which is in the ballpark of LG's IPS black panels, even though I don't believe this is an IPS black panel. It's obviously still well short of VA LCDs and OLEDs, and overall black level performance is poor, but I was pleasantly surprised to see better than average IPS results, which do help to mitigate this IPS trade-off. Viewing angles are fine in the good to slightly below average range compared to other IPS LCDs. The problem that LCDs face these days is competition from OLEDs, which have much better viewing angles and less of a brightness shift at off angles. For most people, this panel should be fine, just be aware that viewing angles are not as good as OLEDs. Also not as good as OLEDs is panel uniformity. QD OLEDs are generally very uniform from edge to edge, so if you're after that sort of experience, a 32-inch 4K QD OLED will be the way to go. The G80HS, I would say, has mediocre uniformity. My unit was a bit patchy, and there was some brightness fall off along the left and right edges compared to the center. In a lot of situations, it's not that noticeable, but if you're leaning towards this 6K monitor for its productivity chops, you might find this a bit annoying in applications with uniform backgrounds. The G80HS's built-in features are accessible through the OSD, which is controllable through a directional toggle in a slightly awkward location on the back of the unit. This directional toggle also feels terrible to use. Clicking the toggle in to select stuff sometimes feels like I'm flexing the PCB that the toggle is attached to, and the whole setup there just feels very cheap. The actual feature set is fine. As I mentioned earlier, there are lots of color controls to fine-tune white balance, gamma, shadow detail, and stuff like that. You can turn off local dimming, which I'd recommend doing, and there are some gaming features like the black equalizer and crosshairs. However, there's no picture-in-picture mode, no KVM switch, and no black frame insertion. Software updates are supported over USB. For port selection, we have one DisplayPort 2.1 UHBR 13.5, two HDMI 2.1 48 gigabits per second ports, and a 2-port USB 5 gigabits per second hub. There's no USB-C input on this monitor. Both DisplayPort and HDMI require the use of DSC to run at 6K 165Hz, and this would have been true even if Samsung used DP 2.1 UHBR 20, as the bandwidth required exceeds 80 gigabits per second. I reckon they used UHBR 13.5 to make the hardware design simpler, and it has no real impact on the product. The overall design of the G80HS isn't that impressive in my opinion when you consider the monitor costs $1,600 US. That's a high-end price point, but the build quality and use of materials is more in line with budget monitors that I've tested. The base of the stand, for example, is covered with very basic black plastic, whereas other monitors are moving to sleek, thin metal bases on products of this sort of class. The front of the display is of course dominated by the 32-inch panel with slim bezels on 3 sides and a chin along the bottom edge. It looks fine. There's a standard matte coating like we've seen on other IPS LCDs, which I feel is appropriate on this monitor. The rear is mostly made of, again, quite basic black plastic. It's a thin monitor, which is good to see from an LCD, but the choice of materials leaves a bit to be desired, and I wouldn't describe it as overly sleek looking. There's an RGB LED ring around the stand connection, which looks fine enough. The stand supports height, tilt, and swivel adjustment with a good range of height on offer. The base is flat so items can be easily placed on it, which is a nice bonus. Overall, the Samsung Odyssey G80HS is quite an interesting monitor, and it's unique in that it's the first 6K display that is actually suitable for gaming. I think there's two main questions that I need to answer with this one. Is the G80HS a good monitor? And is the G80HS a good value monitor? In terms of the G80HS being a good monitor, I think Samsung have largely succeeded in what they set out to achieve. The 6K resolution looks brilliant, it has excellent text clarity, tons of pixel real estate, and so we get a great high DPI screen for productivity work. The 165Hz refresh rate in the 6K mode is massively improved over previous 6K 60Hz panels, making it much nicer to use in desktop apps than a lot of the Pro monitors on the market. 60Hz is an absolute deal breaker for me, so the ability to get a high density screen with an acceptable refresh rate is a great step forward. This monitor has great gaming chops as well. 6K is obviously quite challenging to run in a lot of titles, though lightweight games look fantastic at such a high resolution. But it's really the 3K dual mode that makes this a viable gaming monitor. 3K is much less taxing on game performance, it still looks good in my opinion with similar sharpness to a 27-inch 1440p screen, and it offers a decent 330Hz refresh rate. This panel actually delivers on the promise of dual mode, unlike older 4K models with a crappy low-resolution 1080p dual mode that was really only suitable for some competitive games. On this screen, I'd recommend the 3K configuration for most games and thought it worked really well. The combination of the two modes allows the G80HS to offer a broad range of capabilities to people that use their monitor for multiple types of content. It's a very versatile display. You've got the super sharp 6K mode for productivity work and the faster 3K mode for gaming within the same 32-inch panel, so that's an overall success. Response time performance is fine enough. This isn't a slow monitor, but it's not rapid either, and the 3K configuration could have been better tuned, especially considering Samsung locks the overdrive setting when VRR is enabled. OLEDs are of course much faster than this IPS LCD, and you should probably choose an OLED over this LCD if motion clarity is most important to you. But on the whole, this screen is fast enough for gaming without annoying blur trails or other major issues. Where the G80HS was a little underwhelming is in its factory calibration. I suspect a lot of people will be purchasing a 6K display to use with productivity tasks and even some content creation. While this is not a professional display as part of Samsung's Odyssey gaming line, I would have liked to see better out-of-the-box calibration for creators. It can be manually calibrated into a great position, but given it's in the same price range as pro-grade 6K displays, albeit 60Hz ones, extra attention in this area would have been appreciated. The big thing that this monitor doesn't offer is any sort of real HDR hardware, which is highly disappointing given the high price point of this display. For $1,600 US, I think it's fair to expect a proper mini LED local dimming backlight in 2026, but the G80HS comes equipped with just crappy edge-lit local dimming. I think with 8 zones, though it's hard to tell given how often the zones are active. Peak brightness also tops out at just 440 nits, which is well short of the brightness required for proper HDR visuals. I mean, there's no way around it. This screen looks bad in HDR content, especially compared to cheaper monitors that offer proper HDR, like 32-inch OLEDs or even some of the previous 4K mini LED LCDs. Black levels are almost always raised and brightness is low. This screen is just not capable of the contrast required to show HDR content in the way it's intended. In the over $1,000 class, I'd say this monitor's HDR performance is abysmal. LG, for example, at least offer a 2304 zone backlight with their 27-inch 5K monitor, and that's cheaper than this Samsung model. Despite not offering good HDR, I think the G80HS is still a decent product for 6K productivity work and SDR gaming on the side. If you're aware of that limitation and you primarily want it for the high DPI screen, it's something I could potentially recommend. Now, is the G80HS a good value monitor? That depends on the perspective. 32-inch 6K 60Hz professional monitors are around $1,300 US these days, so Samsung are offering a higher refresh rate variant with a proper gaming mode for about 20% more. It doesn't have the professional grade calibration you'd expect from, say, the Asus ProArt option, but given the higher refresh rate and other benefits, I'd say it's at least somewhat competitive in the 6K segment. Expensive, but not too outrageous relative to other options at the same resolution. It's not a good value gaming monitor though. The G80HS is extremely expensive when you look at the gaming market as a whole, and its value proposition is significantly weakened given it doesn't offer true HDR. You'd have to be absolutely certain you want the 6K resolution to even entertain this product. It makes no sense otherwise. This makes it relatively niche. I just can't see mainstream everyday gamers wanting to use this panel at this price. The problem Samsung face is that 32-inch 4K 240Hz OLEDs are much cheaper. Yes, they aren't as high in resolution, but they're faster, offer proper HDR support, better contrast, better uniformity, and the 4K resolution strikes a good balance between clarity and FPS performance. You can find great 4K QD OLEDs for $800 US, which is half the price of this 6K display, and that makes it really tough to recommend the 6K option. And I'd say that even for productivity, I use a 4K QD OLED for work every day, and I'd buy one instead of the G80HS given the Golf-in price. This monitor would be much more competitive and more appealing if the price was more reasonable, maybe something around $1,000 US or a little under that. You might find it available at that price on sale later in the year, given Samsung are known to heavily discount products, but at the MSRP, you'd have to prioritize the 6K resolution over everything else to even consider the G80HS at that price. So anyway, that's it for this review. We've added the Samsung Odyssey G80HS to our monitor.deals website. So if you are interested in this one and you find the price too high, as I've sort of said, you will see that pop up when we start seeing discounts and sales on it on monitor.deals. So go back and check out that website regularly if you're interested in this product. We'll link to that in the description below. Down there, you'll also find links to our Patreon account. If you want to sign up, you get access to some cool benefits, the calibrated settings that we create for all of the monitors we review. We've also got our Discord community, a great place to chat about monitors, ask questions, and that sort of thing. So thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.